The moment I knew something was wrong wasn't when I first noticed the missing money. It wasn't even when I found the locked investment dashboard. It was the look in her eyes, cold, calculated, with just a hint of satisfaction, when she told me I must have forgotten giving her permission to take $72,000 from our retirement savings. "You weren't exactly yourself," Kendra said, with that little smirk I once found charming. Now it made my blood run cold. That smile used to make my heart race. Now it only made me sick. My name is Thomas Everly. I'm 63 years old, and until 8 months ago I thought I understood what betrayal meant. I'd been through a difficult divorce in my 40s, lost friends to petty disagreements, even had a business partner try to edge me out of the company I built from nothing. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what it feels like when the person sleeping beside you, the one who promised to care for you in sickness and in health, decides your moment of weakness is the perfect opportunity to rob you blind. And the worst part? For weeks, I blamed myself, called myself a fool, wondered if she was right, if my stroke-addled brain had simply forgotten giving her permission to drain our accounts while I lay helpless in a hospital bed, fighting to remember how to button my own shirt. This is the story of how I lost almost everything, and then took it all back, plus interest. The headache started on a Tuesday, dull at first, then suddenly blinding, like someone had driven an ice pick through my left temple. I was in the garage, organizing a shelf of old power tools I'd been meaning to sell, when the room began to tilt. My right arm went numb, then my leg. I remember thinking, this can't be happening to me. I'm too young. But it was happening. The floor rose up to meet me, and the last thing I heard was Kendra's voice, distant and oddly calm, speaking to the 911 operator. "Yes, I think my husband is having a stroke. No, he's not conscious anymore." When I woke up 2 days later in the ICU at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, Kendra was there, holding my hand, tears in her eyes. She looked exhausted, her normally perfect makeup absent, her designer clothes replaced with wrinkled sweatpants and a t-shirt. "You scared the hell out of me, Tommy," she whispered, brushing my hair back from my forehead. "Don't you ever do that again." The doctors called it a moderate ischemic stroke. I was lucky, they said. The clot-busting drugs they'd administered had prevented the worst of the damage. I'd need intensive rehabilitation, but with work, I could expect to make a strong recovery. What none of them told me, what I had to discover all on my own, was that a stroke doesn't just attack your body. It assaults your dignity, your independence, your sense of self. One day, I was Thomas Everly, respected former business owner, the man who'd built Everly's Hardware into a chain of 6 stores across eastern Tennessee, before selling to a national retailer for a comfortable sum. The next, I was a patient, struggling to form complete sentences, unable to walk without assistance, fighting to remember simple words. For the first week, Kendra barely left my side. She charmed the nurses, brought homemade cookies for the staff, stayed overnight in the uncomfortable hospital chair despite my protests. When they transferred me to the rehabilitation center, she decorated my room with photos from home, brought my favorite clothes, made sure the staff knew all my preferences. "Don't you worry about a thing," she'd say, kissing my forehead. "I'm taking care of everything. The bills, the house, our investments, it's all handled. You just focus on getting better." And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Kendra had been my wife for 4 years. We'd met shortly after I sold my business. She was 41 to my 59, beautiful and vibrant, with a marketing career and a laugh that could light up a room. My friends had their doubts, of course. My daughter Camille was politely reserved. But I was smitten, convinced I'd found a second chance at happiness after 10 years of being alone following my divorce. Rehabilitation was grueling. 8 weeks of daily physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, learning to walk again, to dress myself, to speak without the frustrating pauses and word-finding difficulties. Through it all, Kendra visited 3 times a week, always perfectly dressed again, always with stories about friends we'd see once I was home, trips we'd take when I was better. But as the weeks wore on, I began to notice subtle changes. She'd check her watch more frequently during visits, take phone calls in the hallway, her voice hushed. She started mentioning expenses, how the house needed unexpected repairs, how our health insurance wasn't covering as much as she'd hoped, how inflation was affecting our monthly budget. "Don't worry," she'd say when she saw my concern. "I'm handling it. You've set us up so well, Tommy. We'll be fine." The day I finally came home, exactly 7 weeks and 3 days after my stroke, I expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt a strange unease I couldn't name. Our house looked the same, but something felt off. Kendra had prepared my favorite meal, arranged the living room furniture to accommodate my still somewhat shaky gait, even hired a part-time nurse to help with my ongoing exercises. But that night, when I asked to look at our accounts, a habit from years of careful financial management, she became evasive. "Oh, Tommy, you don't need to worry about that now. The doctor said stress is bad for your recovery," I insisted. She sighed dramatically, then brought her laptop. "I had to change some passwords for security," she said, typing quickly. "There was a notice from the bank about suspicious activity. The investment dashboard was there, but something looked wrong. The balance was lower than I remembered, much lower. And when I tried to click on the transaction history, a password prompt appeared." "What's this?" I asked. "Just another security layer," she said smoothly, taking the laptop back. "The financial advisor recommended it after your stroke. Identity theft targeting the elderly is so common these days." I was 63, hardly elderly, but I let it go. My head was beginning to throb, and the familiar fog of fatigue was rolling in. Maybe tomorrow, I thought. I'll look more closely tomorrow. But tomorrow brought more evasions, and the next day, and the day after that. When I finally pressed harder, sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of cooling coffee between my hands, Kendra's demeanor changed entirely. "Fine," she snapped, pulling up the bank statement on her phone. "See? Everything's right here." That's when I saw it. A withdrawal of $72,000, dated just 10 days after my stroke. "What is this?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "Kendra, what did you do?" She didn't even flinch, just examined her perfect manicure, then looked at me with those cold eyes. "My brother's startup needed investors. You agreed to help him before your stroke. Don't you remember? We discussed it over dinner." I began, but she cut me off. "Tommy, this is exactly what the doctors warned me about. Memory gaps are common after a stroke. You weren't exactly yourself for a while there." That smirk appeared, just for a second. "It's sweet that you're concerned, but I would never do anything without your permission." I felt sick, dizzy. Was she right? Had I agreed to this and simply forgotten? The weeks around my stroke were admittedly foggy in places. But $72,000 for her brother's business venture I'd never even heard about. "I want to talk to the bank," I said finally. "They won't discuss anything with you right now," she replied quickly. "I had to use the power of attorney while you were incapacitated. It's still active until your doctors clear you." Another smile, this one not reaching her eyes. "For your protection, of course." Power of attorney. The document I'd signed 2 years ago when we updated our wills, never imagining it would be used like this. Never imagining the woman I loved would wield it as a weapon. The power of attorney I'd signed for peace of mind had become the knife she turned on me. For the next 2 weeks, I lived in a state of growing anxiety and suspicion. Kendra was always on her phone, always stepping out for errands, that took hours. When I checked the mail, one of the small tasks I could manage independently, I found late notices for bills I thought were on autopay. The refrigerator was nearly empty most days, despite Kendra claiming she'd just gone shopping. And then came the day that changed everything. My daughter Camille arrived unexpectedly, her familiar knock at the door a welcome surprise. At 38, she was the spitting image of her mother, my first wife, with the same practical approach to life and unflinching honesty that had sometimes caused friction between us over the years. "Dad," she said, hugging me carefully, "you look better than I expected." Kendra's smile tightened as she offered Camille a lukewarm welcome. "I would have prepared something if I'd known you were coming." "Last-minute decision," Camille replied, not quite meeting Kendra's eyes. "Thought I'd check on Dad, maybe help out for a few days." "That's really not necessary," Kendra said quickly. "We have a routine working perfectly." But Camille stayed, sleeping in our guest room, watching Kendra with increasingly suspicious eyes. She helped me with my exercises, prepared healthy meals, and most importantly, listened when I finally confessed my concerns late one night after Kendra had gone to bed. "Something's wrong, Camille. The accounts, the passwords, the withdrawal. I'm not imagining things, am I?" Camille took my hand, her expression grave. "Dad, do you trust me?" I nodded. "Then let me look into some things. Don't confront her yet. Just let me do a little digging first." The next morning, while Kendra was at her Pilates class, which I'd begun to suspect wasn't really Pilates at all, Camille went through the stack of mail I hadn't been allowed to see. That's when she found it. A bank notice confirming a wire transfer of $72,000 to Breakthrough Innovations LLC, with a signature that was supposedly mine, but looked nothing like my handwriting. "Dad," Camille said quietly, showing me the paper. "This is dated 12 days after your stroke. You were still in the ICU, heavily medicated. There's no way you signed this." The realization hit me like another stroke, sudden, violent, and world-altering. Kendra had forged my signature, stolen my money, and then gaslighted me into believing I'd forgotten giving permission. "What do I do?" I whispered, feeling more vulnerable than I had even in the hospital. Camille's jaw set in a determined line I recognized from her childhood. "You fight back, and I know exactly who can help." Malcolm Rivers looked more like a retired football coach than an elder law attorney, with his broad shoulders and no-nonsense demeanor. But the moment he started speaking, his expertise was clear. "What you're describing, Mr. Everly, is a textbook case of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The timing of the transfer, the forged signature, the ongoing attempts to restrict your access to financial information. It's all documented in your favor." "But the power of attorney," I began. "Is a fiduciary relationship," Malcolm interrupted firmly. "It legally obligates your wife to act in your best interest, not her brother's. The fact that she used it to transfer funds without proper documentation, then actively deceived you about it afterward, is a serious breach of both legal and ethical obligations." For the first time since coming home, I felt something other than confusion and shame. I felt anger, clear, righteous, and energizing. "What can we do?" I asked. Malcolm laid out a plan, methodical and comprehensive. First, secure all evidence, bank statements, the forged document, email communications. Second, revoke the power of attorney immediately. Third, freeze all joint accounts to prevent further withdrawals. Fourth, document every instance of gaslighting and financial manipulation. "And then," he said, his eyes steady on mine, "we go on the offensive." Over the next 3 weeks, Camille and I operated in secret. She helped me contact the bank to flag the suspicious transfer. We found emails in Kendra's poorly hidden account, showing communication with her brother about the investment opportunity dating back months before my stroke. We discovered transfers to a separate account Kendra had opened in only her name. And most damning of all, we found a text message she'd accidentally synced to our shared iPad. He's still too confused to notice. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late to do anything about it. The night I confronted her, I was surprisingly calm. Camille was staying with a friend, giving us privacy for what we knew would be an ugly scene. Kendra came home late, as had become her habit, smelling of expensive perfume and someone else's cologne. "We need to talk," I said simply, sitting at the kitchen table with a folder of documents before me. Her eyes flicked to the folder, then back to my face, calculating. "About what, Tommy?" "It's late, and I'm tired." "About the $72,000 you stole from our joint account while I was in the ICU. About the forged signature on the wire transfer. About the text messages to your brother planning all of this months before my stroke ever happened." The change in her expression was immediate. Shock, quickly replaced by defensive anger. "You've been snooping through my things? With your daughter? That's an invasion of privacy." "No, Kendra. That's self-protection. Something I should have been better at from the beginning." What followed was a hurricane of denials, accusations, and finally, threats. She would leave me. She would take half of everything. She would tell everyone I was mentally incompetent. I'd never proven my cognitive abilities since the stroke. No one would believe me over her. I simply slid the revocation of power of attorney across the table. "It's already filed with the court. As of this morning, you no longer have any legal authority over my finances or medical decisions." Her face contorted with fury. "You think that changes anything? We're still married. I'm entitled to half of everything you own." "We'll see about that," I replied, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. "The divorce papers will be served tomorrow, and I've already filed a civil suit for fraud and financial exploitation." For the first time since I'd known her, Kendra looked genuinely afraid. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered. "The embarrassment, the scandal, you'd never put yourself through that." I leaned forward, finding strength in truth I'd been too ashamed to acknowledge before. "The embarrassment already happened, Kendra. You made sure of that when you decided to steal from me while I was fighting to recover from a stroke. The only difference now is that everyone else will know exactly what kind of person you really are." She moved out that night, taking only her clothes and personal items, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I sat alone in my living room for hours afterward, alternating between relief and a grief so profound it felt physical. The next morning, I found myself in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. The slight droop on the left side of my face, the new lines of stress around my eyes, the silver hair I'd once been proud of, now seeming to signal vulnerability rather than wisdom. "You old fool," I whispered to my reflection, tears streaming down my face. "You lonely, desperate old fool." That's how Camille found me, slumped on the bathroom floor, sobbing like I hadn't since I was a child. She didn't say anything, just sat beside me and held my hand until the storm passed. Later, as she made us both tea, she finally spoke. "You know, Dad, trusting someone doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you a fool. It makes you human." I shook my head. I should have seen it coming. The age difference, the rush to marriage, the way she always seemed more interested in our financial planning than our future plans. "Maybe," Camille acknowledged. "But love makes us all blind sometimes. The question is, what do you do when you finally can see clearly?" The answer, as it turned out, was everything necessary. The legal proceedings took nearly 6 months. Kendra fought viciously at first, hiring an aggressive attorney who specialized in high-conflict divorces. She claimed I had verbally agreed to the investment. that my memory was compromised, that she deserved compensation for caring for an ill spouse. But evidence doesn't lie. The forged signature, the text messages, the timing of the transfers coinciding exactly with my most vulnerable moments in the hospital, the separate account she'd opened, the browser history, showing she'd researched stroke effects on memory and challenging power of attorney after stroke. 3 months in, her attorney approached Malcolm with a settlement offer. She'd return $50,000 of the $72,000 if I dropped the fraud charges. I refused. 2 weeks later, they offered $65,000. Again, I refused. I don't just want the money back, I told Malcolm. I want this on record. I want her held accountable. The court date arrived on a crisp autumn morning. I wore my best suit, leaning only slightly on a cane, a vast improvement from the walker I'd needed months before. Kendra arrived in an outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, her expression confident as she swept past me without acknowledgement. That confidence evaporated as Malcolm methodically presented our case. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, watched Kendra's face with increasing disapproval as the evidence mounted. When Kendra finally took the stand, her practice story about my verbal agreement crumbled under cross-examination. "So you're testifying," Malcolm said, his voice deceptively gentle, "that Mr. Everly, while heavily sedated in the ICU, clearly authorized you to transfer $72,000 to your brother's startup, a business he had never discussed with you before his stroke." "He was having lucid moments," Kendra insisted, but her voice had lost its certainty. "Lucid enough to change his mind about an investment he'd previously declined? Lucid enough to forget his long-standing policy against mixing family and financial matters? Lucid enough to sign this document?" Malcolm held up the transfer authorization, with handwriting that 3 experts have testified could not possibly be his. Kendra's composure finally broke. "He owed me!" she shouted, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. 4 years of my life given to an old man. 4 years playing the devoted wife when I could have been with someone my own age, someone who could give me children before it was too late. The courtroom fell silent. Even her attorney looked stunned by the outburst. The judge's expression hardened as Kendra seemed to realize what she'd done. I didn't mean," she stammered, but it was too late. The judge's ruling came swiftly. The divorce was granted on grounds of fraud and cruel treatment. Kendra would receive no alimony. The $72,000 would be returned to me in full, plus interest. The house remained solely my property, as it had been purchased before our marriage. And most devastatingly for Kendra, the judge referred the case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges of elder financial exploitation and fraud. As we left the courtroom, I saw Kendra huddled with her attorney, her makeup streaked with tears, her confident posture replaced by a defeated slump. I felt no satisfaction in her distress, only a profound sadness, for what might have been had greed and resentment not poisoned what I once thought was love. "It's over," Camille said quietly beside me. "You did it, Dad." But it wasn't quite over. A week later, I received a call from a financial investigator with the IRS. It seemed that neither Kendra nor her brother had reported the $72,000 investment on their tax returns. The investigation was expanding to include potential tax fraud, a consequence I hadn't anticipated, but couldn't find it in myself to regret. The day I finally felt free again wasn't when the court ruled in my favor. It wasn't when the bank transferred the full amount back to my account, now secured with new passwords and additional security measures. It wasn't even when I received confirmation that Kendra's brother's business had failed spectacularly, taking the remainder of her savings with it. No, freedom came on a quiet Tuesday evening, exactly 1 year after my stroke. I walked through my house, slowly but steadily, without the cane I'd finally discarded. and realized I was no longer looking for evidence of betrayal around every corner. I was no longer flinching at the sound of the front door. I was no longer doubting my own memory or judgment. I didn't celebrate with champagne or an elaborate dinner. I simply sat on my back porch, watching the Tennessee sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and purple, and took a deep, full breath, perhaps the first one I'd taken in over a year. The next morning, I did something I'd been considering for months. I signed up for a support group for survivors of elder financial abuse. Not just to receive help, but to offer it. To tell my story to others who might be afraid, ashamed, or convinced they're alone in their experience. Because if I've learned anything from this ordeal, it's that financial betrayal by someone you love doesn't just steal your money. It attempts to steal your dignity, your confidence, and your trust in yourself. And reclaiming those things is every bit as important as reclaiming your financial security. In the end, it wasn't the money that broke me, it was doubting my own memory. And it wasn't the court ruling that healed me. It was the moment I trusted myself again. If you're managing finances in a second marriage, especially one with a significant age difference, consider these protective measures I wish I'd taken. First, maintain some financial separation. Love doesn't require merging every account. Keep your primary retirement funds in your name only, while creating joint accounts for household expenses. Second, establish clear legal protections while you're healthy and clear-headed. A durable power of attorney is essential, but choose your agent carefully, ideally someone without conflicts of interest, and include specific limitations on large transfers or investments. Third, create a financial circle of trust. My daughter Camille saved me, but I could have avoided months of confusion by giving her visibility into my finances from the beginning. Have at least one person besides your spouse who understands your financial situation and can check for irregularities. Finally, recognize the warning signs of financial gaslighting: unexplained withdrawals, sudden password changes, diverted mail, emotional manipulation when money questions arise, and the classic, "you must have forgotten," when confronted with evidence. I'm not telling you to be suspicious of everyone you love. Trust remains one of life's most precious gifts. But trust should be balanced with sensible protections, not because you expect betrayal, but because you value your financial security enough to safeguard it, even from those closest to you. Have you ever been taken advantage of when you were vulnerable by someone you trusted? You're not alone. Share your story in the comments. And if my comeback gave you hope, subscribe for more true stories of betrayal, resilience, and late-life justice. Because sometimes the most important wealth we can protect isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity,